Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Prep Life Podcast. This is your founder and CEO of Glam Girl Bikini, Amy Anger. And today I am joined by my fabulous co host, Leemarie Hostetter. Leemarie, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good. So today we're going to be talking about basically, are you ready for a national show? You, is your body ready? Is your mind, are your finances? So many different factors. Is it realistic for you to do a national show? And as a coach, I personally don't want to really send anybody unless they're going to be top five or they have a chance of going pro and that they're matching the criteria. So we're going to go into a lot of different things revolving around are you ready for a national show? Are you ready for a pro qualifier? But first, I think you wanted to share some bikini news as we are news reporters these days at the beginning of the show.
We started this segment last week with some news, but there's big news in the bikini world, and that is that our current Miss Bikini Olympia is not going to try and defend her title this year. So Jennifer Dory released a video on her Instagram and she announced that she will not be competing, although she will be attending the Olympia. And she said that she needed to take the time to focus on some other areas of her life and alluded to other areas in her career that she wanted to focus on. So I feel like that anytime a Miss Olympia is not going to come back and defend her title, that leaves the stage wide open, and I think the competition is going to be very stiff and really exciting to watch this year. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's a lot of people that are going to be trying to defend their titles of previous Miss Bikini Olympias are going to be in the show, like Maureen and Ashley Kay. I think she's trying to line it up so that her 50th win is the 60th, Olympia championship and her 50th pro win. And yeah, and then we have some people that they've been Miss Bikini International, like Laura Lee Chapados, but yeah, and then Isa Piccini and I believe Angelica Teixeira are coming back. So lots of former Miss Olympias are competing at this one. So
Amy has some momentum coming off of some wins.
yes, Amy Delgado as well. Yes.
Very
Yeah, she
exciting
was
for us.
right on the cusp. Yeah. So okay, so with that announcement, like let's just dive right into this topic because I feel like I made a lot of bullets and I don't know why, but it spurred my attention. And if any of you listeners watch or listen to Bikinis After Babies podcast with Jillian Hughes and Mandy Rashawn, they kind of said something about how I was talking to Jillian backstage about how I had done 15, I've gotten 15 national qualifications and never even thought about going to nationals. And it was just like there were a combination of things as to why I didn't. Number one, I think is just I never had a coach that really showed me like that there was a path to getting the pro card. Like I just was collecting trophies. So I didn't really know what nationals was or what ones to go to and things like that. So when I moved to Kansas City, the twins over at Twin Fitness here, they're both pros. And actually, Christy was my coach at the time, and she recommended that I try Masters Nationals. And I had a great experience. It was fantastic. Um, and so, it wasn't until I was 35 that I did this, and I'd been competing since I was 31. So, yeah, it just got me to thinking about I don't think anyone should do the extreme that I did, where you should do 15 shows. But there's a really happy medium of like the balance of getting the experience and the foundation as an NPC amateur competitor before you step on a national stage. And I think there's a lot of things to consider. So I guess I'm going to jump ahead to number two, whereas, like I kind of already mentioned, do you have a coach that knows how to properly navigate you? Um, Through that strategy because there is a strategy and an appropriate show path for you. And we'll talk about all the components that go behind that strategy and the components that need to be considered. But I do think it's important that you have a coach that knows the national circuit, that knows what your best next steps are that are most advantageous for you. And we were talking offline before we got on, and I was just thinking about how in the last 2 years, things have gotten really expensive and plus inflation's really bad. And so I've just really been a lot more conservative about how many people I send to national competitions. Um, and again, like I'm a little fish in a big pond of like really renowned. I mean, I know there's coaches out there that get like multiple pro cards a year, but I just know that, the two pro qualifiers that are national competitions that I took athletes to this year, they both went pro. Um, and then last year I had like 7 athletes go to the Ben Weeder and, um, I mean, pretty much everyone came home with like 2 or 3 medals. So they all placed top five. And I just think it's important to consider a lot of things. So do you want to, do you want to talk about some of the things that we should consider as an athlete? And I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but a couple of these bullet points, I think from the athlete standpoint, it's their responsibility to take care of. So do you want to go over some of those or do you want me to go over those?
Like what about the show path specifically?
So, okay, so I'll just kind of go through it on the athlete side, and then there's a coach's side to it too, I think. So the first one I think is as an athlete, you need to figure out your finances and do you have time to commit to this goal? So a national show is a big financial commitment. Most of the time you're going to have to pay for a plane ticket, you're going to have to pay for the hotel. Hotels have gotten very expensive over the last 2 years and you're going to have to pay for a very expensive entry fee, hair and makeup, and then probably a tan. So, it's a couple grand when it comes down to it. And then you also have to factor in that you would need to qualify in a regional or a national qualifier. So we've talked about those finances when we kind of compared and contrast the WBFF with the NPC and that route. And I think I remember it being around 2,800 for both. Like when it was all said and done, if you did like the whole deal, like pictures, video, all that stuff. Um, so thinking about that and then just thinking about like the time that you have on your hands, because let's face it, the prep is going to require, as an athlete, it's going to require more of your time where you're either going to have to be very good at time managing and slotting things in and doing more than what you are normally doing on a normal day because you're going to probably have a lot more time dedicated to cardio, your training, your meal prepping and things like that. So there is like a tipping scale, or if you want to think of it as a dimmer, like on a light switch, it's dimming up pretty bright when you're in prep. You have to really commit a lot more time and you have to also commit like more sleep and things like that, like where social calendars and family calendars need to come into play. So, from an athlete standpoint, I would say that those would be the important ones. And then if we kind of backpedal, um, I think I, as a coach, they need to look at how that athlete did at the regional national qualifier. So I have a couple of examples of people that have won overalls or they've been in the overall and they've placed top five and they've done very well at nationals. So I think, it doesn't necessarily mean like just because you win your class like you should go right to nationals because you're nationally qualified because you got first or second. There's a lot more that goes into that. And especially with the way shows are. So the trend, especially this year, and if you look at national shows and you look at regional shows, open bikini as amateurs, the numbers are down significantly. Um, I mean, by a large amount. They're very underattended. So I would say masters competitors, that really hasn't changed. Like those are the bigger groups. But I would say open bikini amateurs, those numbers are way down because I think there's a lot required financially. And we can talk about some other things other than just the entry fees and things like that. Because I do think that, and this is just a side tangent, but I think that in some cases, like depending on certain coaches and certain guidance, not particularly our team, but there's like some drug protocols and things that's like a hefty bill to pay. And so I think you have to kind of look at how that person does against, you know, and it matters like what the quality of the show is, not necessarily the numbers of people that are attending, but like how quality is the competition? How quality is the judging panel? I know for me, like I have athletes that are doing Masters USAs and I'm putting them in front of Sandy in 3 weeks in San Jose because I need for them to I need for Sandy to see them before they step on stage in November. And I know that like if we get feedback from her that we're gonna know exactly what to do. So I think all of that matters, from that standpoint. And then I think with so I kind of talked about the irrelevancy of like the regional placements. Um, and then let's talk about kind of some of the you
Yeah.
look like you have a thought, so I'll stop there because I kind of like am spewing out data here.
I'm looking at kind of your one of your points that is talking about fully addressing what needs to be done to achieve the goals that you're aiming for. I think a really important thing as an athlete, from the athlete's perspective, is why, like, what are your goals in competing? And I think it
Yeah.
usually falls into one of two categories. I think either you are doing it as a bucket list item, which I think is amazing, super fun. It's a great experience. You learn how to be extremely disciplined, and it's a lot of fun to compete at a show, especially if you're on a team. And then the other one is if you are actually competitive and want to get your pro card. And so if it is just a bucket list item, but you happen to love the regional show and you want to do a national show just for a bucket list item, I think communicating that with your coach might change your strategy a little bit. I know I've mentioned to you certain shows that just conveniently would fit within my timeline, or I'm in the area, or it wouldn't be that far from me, or something. And then you'll look at the show and you'll say, well, actually this show might not be the smartest because the overall gets a pro card versus this show where maybe there are more pro cards given or something like that, and you'll have a different aspect or a different like perspective on it. And I think for me, I actually just love the sport, and I'm a big fan of the sport, and I love being involved in the sport, and I am competitive, so I love doing national shows. But part of the fun is just I'll sometimes just continue to do a regional show as like a warm-up show and just enjoying doing those lower level shows and maybe saving some money, maybe not having to fly, but just enjoying competing and being a part of the sport. And I think all of those play into timeline and when you would do a national show, because if you want to be competitive, you want to make sure you have the off season and the money for the coaching during the off season and the time to invest in a good off season for to bring a good national package too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, it's different for every person too. Like you said, it's personal preference. So I'm the same way. Like to me, I actually love being an amateur. I love not that I don't want to go pro. I do, obviously, but I think about all these years that I've competed and how much joy it's brought my life. And if I would have gone pro, I probably would have never competed at the pro level or, you know, I mean, it wasn't until just now, like that recently that they've been having shows for like masters competitors. And like I said, my first national show was at Masters Nationals. So masters pros, that whole like arena is starting to grow just this year. And I just think I would have missed out on a lot of experiences. And I think that was like kind of what Jillian's point was when she was talking about it on her podcast was just like she really enjoyed those 19 years. I mean, of being an amateur, like those experiences. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. I feel like it also just helped me with my path. I think if things would have come easily, then and I wouldn't have struggled and I wouldn't have learned so many lessons, like I wouldn't have probably been so motivated to like start my own company and coach other people and things like that. But I digress. So as far as like that path, I do think, you need to be specific about what you're doing. So, for example, like when Chris turned pro, we made sure that she did a show in the spring, that I was there, that there was a national panel of judges. We had a plan A, which was Universe. She got 15th. Um, and then I kind of saw what she needed to do for North Americans, and then she went pro. Um, it's different for every competitor. I remember like Karina, my athlete, she originally wanted to be bikini, but that's neither here nor there. So she won like an overall in figure. And I just knew that as a natural athlete, what it was going to take for her to be a figure pro was going to be impossible without some sort of PEDs,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So, she had a fitness and a gymnastics background. So I encouraged her to pursue fitness. And then she won overalls in fitness. And then she eventually, won her pro card in fitness. But I think like just thinking about what the athlete, where they want to go, what their goals are, and then coming up with a good timeline so there's not a huge gap because people can get burnt out on prep too, is another thing. You have to think about that athlete's mentality and their physical health. So when you're thinking about getting them regionally qualified, not only is the judging panel and like all of that something to consider, which brings to my point back to the athletes that I'm putting in front of Sandy, we're also they're also competing at 3 p.m. on the West Coast time. Well, guess what time the Masters USA's is? It's at 3 p.m. for the prejudging, and it's West Coast time. For an East Coaster and a Central Standard Time, that's a different digestive level, right? So we want to see how their bodies peak at a lower level show where the stakes aren't high for a pro card, they're not on the line. We want to experiment to see like how their body handles food throughout the day with their prejudging being at 3 p.m. And so that's again, it's part of the strategy. So you want to select a show that would be like a warm up or a regional qualifier that's not too long. Um, April and then doing one in July. Um, that's what Chintzy did. She did a regional show in April. And I think it's fine as long as you reverse that person out for and kind of build up their calories and then start cutting them down. So then she went July and then August, she went pro. And same thing with Chris. Like she did a April show and then Universe was in July and then North Americans was in August. It was enough time that we just had to make sure that they weren't like super burnt out on dieting, right? I think if we would have gone a little bit longer, and I've gone longer than that with athletes, and sometimes you have to find that sweet spot and know kind of when to cut it off, and you kind of have to listen to your athlete, like, are they mentally doing okay? Like, how are they feeling about, like with food and cardio and all of that. So, any thoughts before I move on to the regional show and then a plan A? And then I always think you should have a clustered plan B for another pro qualifier or like, so for masters athletes, usually, universe and masters nationals is a great segue, or masters nationals and North Americans because they're very close together, close enough that you can make like, kind of like a circuit of it and not get too burnt out. But any thoughts on that? Because I know you've done something similar, like with your regional shows and Ben Weeder.
Yeah,
Um,
I think there was only one year that I did two national shows, and I loved doing back to back national shows. I love doing back to back peak weeks. I think my body responds really well to that. But I've never had a show or a season where I did a show and then I had a couple of months or several weeks in between. So I can't really speak to that. I do
yeah,
know watching closely how your athlete is doing, feeling the burnout is really important because I did kind of experience a burnout during my off season of this year. And I know we took some time off of counting macros and things like that. So I think that just always plays into your timeline and figuring out, I
yeah,
think timeline is tops. And timeline, like the first thing you have to consider is having enough time for your body. Do you
mhm,
have that point? Do you have enough muscle and do you have time to get conditioning? So that I think is top, and then everything else falls under that, like
yep,
finances, travel, and schedule and everything. But it is bodybuilding. So obviously, like the first top thing that you want to consider for timeline is your body and getting your body.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so we haven't shared these points on the thing, but one of the other questions that I have in our bullet, like for our notes, is do you have enough muscle? Do you have enough time to get the right conditioning? Do you have the right shape and muscle fullness? Do you have a realistic timeline for growth and personal health? So I think, again, it depends on if you're new or if you're a veteran. So whether or not you've had like judges' feedback and you've had an improvement season to try to work on those things, it's always about reverse engineering the goal, right? So if there's like a certain amount of fat loss that you have to have. Like you need to have enough time so that you're able to burn off that fat without it's that delicate dance of maintaining enough muscle and getting lean enough. So you want to make sure it's like that slow and steady wins the race, that your body has enough time to respond, that you have enough time for like hiccups, bumps in the roads, maybe like an injury, an illness, a family circumstance, an emergency, something that, you have a little bit of a buffer so that you can come in lean early and confident. And then from there, like hopefully you're able to just like kind of play around with just filling that athlete out and things like that. So, um, other thoughts that we haven't brought up about things that I kind of had bulleted here. I think we kind of talked about the show spacing, the judges' feedback, and kind of responding to that. Um, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you want to get there yet, but I think, like I alluded to it before, but actually gauging your shot at getting a pro card. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
obviously, I mean, that is always the goal, but maybe if it's your first year doing nationals, maybe your goal is obviously that, but then maybe your second goal would be top five or first call outs or something like that. I know that I always
mhm,
have that goal of going pro, but I also have another goal, like I want to beat my last package kind of a thing too. But
yeah,
looking at drug tested shows versus if you are using PEDs, or looking at how many pro cards they're giving away, looking at how big the master's classes are, if that's what you're doing, versus the open classes. But I think you're really good also at knowing how many pro cards are going to be given away. And I don't know if you want to like share like how you figure that out, or if it's just from past experiences at shows. Um,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like it's not like really advertised. I used to make a list of just all the national shows and like how many pro cards are given out, and I would share that list like with our athletes and kind of what the dates are, and they usually land on the same date um, every year, and they're usually in the same like venues. So, I'm booking the Sheraton Pittsburgh like months in advance. As soon as the dates are basically released, I reserve that because I know that like North Americans is going to be there, Masters Nationals. So the year starts out with Junior USA's in um, South Carolina, and that one just goes to the overall winner. I think they've increased it to the top three overall. But this last year, I think somebody said there were like 25 to 50 people total in that show, which is crazy. And I think people have kind of avoided it because it is only like the overall, it goes to the overall. So if you win your class, you don't get a pro card at Junior USA's. So that one is like historically unintended, but this year, like especially that it was like I think the record smallest it's ever been. And then next is Junior Nationals, and that's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that goes to one pro card per height class and open only. And so both are open only. And then right after that, well, I guess I missed the Arnold too, because the Arnold this past year, it was very small, like not even five in a class in some of the open bikini, which was crazy. And that went to the top two overall this past year because it was so low. But usually that one's the top three. So that's the one that kind of starts our season off. And that was like March 1st. Um, I mean, do you want me to kind of go through some of the other ones too?
yeah,
Okay. All
yeah.
right. So the Chattanooga one, kind of going back to that one, that Holly Baxter won a pro card at. That one is always Father's Day weekend, so that one's in June. The Junior USA's is in May, usually, like a month earlier than that one. And then once you hit July, you start hitting your first like Masters and Open. So, Universe, it goes to the top two in each height class for a pro card and Open, and then a Masters to the top one. And there's less height and age splits at Universe, and that's July 4th, always the weekend of
Mhm.
Independence Day. It's just always that day. And then 3 weeks later, it's always Masters Nationals. So it's usually like the third week of July. It's in Pittsburgh. And that one has a lot of height splits, a lot of age splits. And that one pro card per class. Then you have USA's, which that one's jumped around. It historically was always in Vegas.
Mhm.
And that one, Universe and Nationals which was in Miami and now is in Dallas, Texas, or Irvine. Those are the only ones that have two pro cards in the open class. So at USA's, two pro cards. Now, I I've only brought my athletes to that one time because that is still a show that is a 2 day show. And that is really hard on an athlete because they have to pay for double makeup, double tan, and then they just go to finals and they may not have placed and they've paid for a whole makeup and they've just walk across the stage. So I kind of avoid that one, even though it does have good odds. It's either in Vegas, it was in Arizona for a while, and then Labor Day weekend is North Americans in Pittsburgh. And
Mhm.
that just goes to first place in the open. And that's a dual masters and open where you can cross over. And then first place in the masters classes. It has less masters splits than masters nationals. And then we move on to, well, this year, the next one in line would be the amateur Olympia, but that date's kind of flipped around. So that one's October 12th, or I think it's on a Tuesday. So it's whatever that week of the Olympia, it's the Tuesday. So that one goes to the top three overall. That one's very international. So it's not all US, but, um, Brittany did that one last year. She got top five. It was still a pretty big show, but the biggest classes were masters and they don't even get a pro card.
Mhm.
So it only goes to the top and open. And then, do you want me to keep going? I feel like I'm
There's only
like,
a couple more, right? There's like Ben
yeah.
and
Yeah, so we have Ben Weeder, like November 17th, 16th. Is that what it
yep.
is this year? That's drug tested. That only goes to one pro card to the overall in 35, which is A and B height classes. And then it goes to the overall and open, which is A through H. And then the pro card winner gets drug tested. And then after that, you have the very next weekend, like the weekend before Thanksgiving, as Masters USA's. And that one gives a pro card to the overall winner A through H of 35, 40, 45, and 50. So that one gives out four pro cards. Overall, it's only Masters. And that one's in LA this year. It came back to LA. It had been in like Arizona for a while. And then, like I said, Masters Nash or I'm sorry, just NPC Nationals is in Texas, in Dallas, Texas. And it's usually like in December. I think this year, do you 13th?
Yeah.
Yeah, last year it was like the 9th or 7th or something like that. So again, they kind of land on the same weekends. At NPC Nationals, top two in open, get a pro card, no masters. So,
Nice.
but yeah.
That's a great breakdown. Your whole year if you want to figure it out. Like you could
Yeah.
literally prep at any time in the year and like choose when you want to do your circuit. So I
Yeah.
love that. Hmm.
Yeah. So we'll kind of end it with that. And I mean, if there was anything that we didn't talk about in terms of being ready for nationals, can you think of anything else that
I actually want to just put it out there. If you guys have questions about going to nationals, about trying to get a pro card, about competing at regionals, about, different judging criterias, different, ways to prep for regionals versus nationals, post them in the comments or DM us on Instagram. We
yeah.
would love to do a follow-up episode with just your Q&As, like just your questions about the subject. I think there
I
will,
kind of nerd out about it.
yeah,
I'm not gonna lie. That's why I kind of get in the weeds with it. So I apologize if I did or if I like
I love it.
went over things that you guys don't know, but I don't feel like it's like just out there on one list. I feel like they should just be like, okay, in this location, this is nationals, like these are how many pro cards there are, but I just don't feel like it's all in one spot. And it could be just because it's different promoters, but I don't know. But
That is true. No, that's a good point. So shoot us your questions if there's something
yeah.
to cover or just something that you want to know. And we'll do an episode if we get enough questions.
Yeah, and you can find us on Instagram at Prep Life Podcast or at Glam Girl Bikini. And then you can apply for coaching with either one of us at glamgirlbikini.com by hitting the Get Started button. Thanks for listening, guys.